was going to save it till the end, but where do you put yourself on in the different camps of presuppositionalism, evidentialism,
Yeah,
etc.?
they're based. There are a lot of these different camps, but really there's two divisions. It's presuppositionalist and everyone else,
That's
because
right.
everyone else is similar.
Yes.
Follows a very particular theological and intellectual motif in the
Right.
way they do the things. There is a theology that drives presuppositionalism. All of the presuppositionalists are reformed, and so they want to start their apologetics where they start the theology with God. Okay, now I'm reformed too, as it turns out, but I'm not a presuppositionalist, and I have particular reasons. And it's, to me, it's a tempest in a teapot, the way I look at it. But that's because I'm not a presuppositionalist, and so I don't have the theological convictions or the commitments that they do that make this approach so important to them. But Schaeffer, though, he believed in common ground, and he used it. And this is not a favorite kind of topic to presuppositionalists, And he looked at a lot of things that presuppositionalists care about, which is the transcendental arguments. Like what kind of world makes arguments necessary? I mean, makes arguments possible.
Yeah.
Well, it's a theistic worldview, not a non-theistic worldview. So just to argue against theism using the tools of argumentation turns out to be an argument for theism, right? So, and that's very clever. And there's different ways. That's, I think, a strength strategically, not theologically or philosophically, but strategically for presuppositionalists. But that can be employed by evidentialists like myself. So I consider myself like Schaeffer. And I actually don't know how he would personally describe himself or would have given this debate, but it's clear reading his writings that he says the kinds of things that some presuppositionalists would never be comfortable saying in light of their convictions about how to do apologetics. And so that's why I would consider him, an evidentialist who is sensitive to presuppositions, and that's where I would put myself.
That's really fascinating. I got into trouble recently in one of the presuppositional apologetics groups on Facebook. And I do consider myself a presuppositionalist, but I've been heavily influenced by Schaeffer and heavily influenced by John Frame. And John Frame himself says he's not a very good Van Tillian. And so I expressed some views in this group that just brought down, it was like Samson pulling the pillars apart and brought the whole house down. And I ended up leaving the group because I'm like, I have to focus on other aspects of life other than just responding to everybody in this group.
Yeah.
But that's very, very interesting. I appreciate how you explain that. When I read Tactics, I found it to be incredibly amenable to me as a presupper. I will say, Greg, I went into this expecting to have red ink all over it and well, that's as a presupposition.
Sure, a book is bleeding when you're done with it.
That's right. That's right. But man, I found so much. I mean, I will say, I barely even marked it up just because I was enjoying it so much.
Oh, good.
As I was reading. But maybe we could back up. Your bio says that you started out thinking that you were too smart for Christianity.
Yeah.
Well, clearly something changed. What changed and when?
Well, everybody who's not a Christian has something that is the roadblock in a certain sense. Now, it really comes down ultimately to personal autonomy. Okay, and this is where I'd be right with presuppositionalists on this thing. People don't want God. They want to do their own thing. Of course, that's not front and center in their mind. This is what's driving the project, the rebellion, all right? Different things become front and center. It might be money, it might be sex, it might be thinking you're too smart. Okay. And so that was kind of my view. I was raised Roman Catholic. I had tried Christianity, found it wanting, wasn't satisfying, or at least that was my understanding of Christianity. And there was a lot of questions that I had that I had no answers for, that seemed adequate for me to disqualify Christianity as an option. All right. And then this was I graduated from high school in 68. So this is this transition. And now I'm thinking, oh, I'm not into that anymore. I'm a grown up now. I'm thinking for myself, like the rest of the world, live for today. Fa la 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 la, live for today. All of these slogans in the music, that captures the ethos of the moment, which is do your own thing. If it feels good, do it. These were all slogans of the time. And but all of these things that were somewhat new for that period have come home to roost, and now they're deeply entrenched in the consciousness of the culture right now, and with really hostile responses if you think differently. That wasn't the case back then, but I'd embrace these things, in particular moral relativism. Now, what's attractive about moral relativism? That is, there's no standard for everybody. Everybody gets to do their own thing. Well, the attraction is everybody gets to do their own thing. So this is kind of a way of morally sanitizing your own personal autonomy. Who are you to tell me what I can do with my life? All right. However, Joel, curiously, I was also marching against the war in Vietnam. Why? Well, I thought that war was an immoral war. Now, you can see the contradiction immediately, and this is something that many people don't see. Even Richard Dawkins, for goodness sake, who, he believes in the universe of no evil, no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. And then he writes in the God Delusion about how evil the God of the Bible is. You can't have it both ways,
Right.
Richard. He's not even thinking about the contradiction, but it's inherent in his complaint. You either got morality or don't. So what's it going to be? However, in my case, I knew there was a contradiction. I was aware of it. I thought, that doesn't work. And I decided to in a sense, dismiss the problem because of the payoff. And the discontinuity didn't matter because I still get to do my own thing. And that was what was most important to me. And what was my cover? My cover for that was the intellectual stuff. Okay. What about the problem of evil, evolution, and, there were, did Adam have a belly button, all of this stuff, where did Cain get his wife? Did he marry his sister? Please. This is all ridiculous. It was all ridiculous to me. And like I said, I had been inoculated because of a tepid religious experience in the Roman Catholic Church. Okay.
When you say inoculated, could you?
And all that, I went to parochial school for 4 years, and so I had so I have good penmanship. They believed in that back then, and I had good instruction, but it wasn't the gospel, and it wasn't until the 70s when my younger brother became a Christian that he began to explain the gospel to me. And the key thing about the gospel that was unique to me as a former Roman Catholic was that this was good news. Means you are promised salvation through Christ. If you're a Roman Catholic, you don't know whether you're going to heaven or not. And by the way, just to think about it, if the gospel means good news, what's good news about that?
Right.
What's the good news about two doors? You're going through one or the other when you die. You're either going to eternal bliss or everlasting torment. Well, which one am I going to? We're not saying, have a nice day.
Yeah.
That's not good news. The good news is you can know this. And of course, I learned this scripturally. It's very clear in a number of passages. 1 John chapter 5 comes to mind, in order that you may know that you have eternal life.
Is there a droid in your...
I don't know where that's coming from, honestly.
I don't hear it now.
Now you hear it?
Yeah.
Oh, I just turned my mic off for a second. What the heck? I honestly don't know what the heck. Well, my bad on that, totally. I guess
not a problem. Not a problem.
But I didn't turn off my answer machine, and so that's what.
Sounded like you had a Star Wars droid,
carousel, or some kind of like we're in the whatever cabaret or whatever.
Yeah.
My apologies. So there we just had a mystical moment. We'll just that's just it's from the 70s back to the 60s of chaos. Anyway, my apology there.
All good.
But now I'm trying to remember where I was at. So I leave Catholicism, and then I'm confronted with the gospel. Okay, now I didn't have good reason to believe it. Not in the way I think about reasons now. And curiously, Joel, apologetics was not a part of my conversion. Most other people who do what I do have apologetics as part of their conversion. That wasn't me at all. I had a different justification, proper basicality, William Lane Craig would say, and that is that the Holy Spirit convicted my soul and brought me to Christ. I just came to a point after hearing the gospel and thinking it back and forth with my brother over, a year or so, that he's onto it, man. He's got it. I didn't want it to be true. And that's reminiscent of Lewis, because he said the same thing, but he just could not. There were reasons that Lewis had that he couldn't deal with. He couldn't fight back on. I didn't have those reasons. In my case, I had more of a raw experience of the Holy Spirit, but I only know it as such now because of my theological understanding. At the time, it was just an awareness. Yeah, this thing is true. This is it, man. I can't. No, it can't. Maybe it is. Kind of thing. And there was a time in my life, ironically, I was marching against the war, but I was also in the Army from 1968 to 74 as a reservist. And I was in my last summer camp with the reserves, and 1973, and I kind of went out into the field, and I just talked to God, and I said one of the prayers that are kind of famous. Lots of people have done this. If you're real, God, I want to know, something like that. And things began happening. And by the fall, actually about a week and a half from right now, will be my spiritual birthday, 49 years. Wow. September 28th, 1973. And it's been a rock and roll ride ever since. It has not been easy. I'm just telling everybody, people, if you're not a Christian listening, you ought to become a Christian. And I'll tell you why, because you're going to stand before God someday, and that's a fact. And you're going to have to account for your life. And if Jesus doesn't pay for your crimes against God, and they are crimes, then you're going to have to pay. And that's going to take forever. All right? That's not I'm sorry. It sounds like hellfire or brimstone, but I wouldn't be doing you a favor if I didn't tell you the truth. It is the truth. Sometimes we candy coat the whole deal right now, but the message in the book of Acts, in the preachments of the gospel, was just what I did. Yeah. That's what they focused in on. Okay. But when I became a Christian in 73, I realized the truth of that, and I was excited. I had been rescued. From myself and made right with God through Christ. And now I wanted to be a player. I wanted to be an active part of the kingdom. Now, when I say player, I would never envision what God was going to do. I absolutely know. And I never had any of these kinds of ambitions. I never wanted to be on radio. I never wanted to write books. It's like that wasn't part of the game plan. But it's what God did. And it's been, I mentioned earlier, it's been hard. But nevertheless, it's been reality. And that's what matters here. So, there's a little thumbnail sketch of how the early years came down for me. And when I got started getting interested in apologetics, Joel, because I was in Westwood Village on the street talking to people, and they in the evenings, Westwood Village back in the 70s, it was like really happening right next to UCLA.
Okay.
Campuses adjacent to it. Lots of stuff going on. Lots of students, a lot of religious trips.
What year was this?
Hare Krishnas were there and all kinds of things. So I'd just be hanging out, doing stuff, walking, and then I get in conversations with people on the street.
This is what year?
Need to know more.
What year was this?
1973 in the fall is when I became a Christian.
Okay.
So the fall of 73, and then 74, 75. I didn't leave that area until summer of 76.
So that's in the height of the Jesus movement.
Oh, absolutely. That was the Jesus movement. I was a Jesus freak, Did you
have long hair?
Who got religion, right? And it was a very cool time. Very, very cool time. I saw, who Keith Green is, right?
Oh, yeah. I love Keith
Green. I saw him perform once before he was a Christian.
What?
Randy Stonehill. Randy dragged him to a small venue concert. There's probably 100 people in the whole concert because it was a very small venue, Pacific Palisades, and he brought his friend, Keith Green. and Keith Green made a wreck of the whole thing. He was wild and crazy, and it was not a good evening. But the next time I saw Keith Green, he was a believer. And the next time after that, I saw him. So he kind of epitomizes, I think, the Jesus movement music element, although there were a whole bunch of other people, you know, Love Song, a lot of Calvary Chapel people before CCM, contemporary Christian music. It was a wild time. Yeah, Jesus movement.
Amazing. Well, then we fast forward, and so you started Stand to Reason in 93, correct?
1993, correct.
1993.
Yeah, 43 years old.
Okay, and when, what's the timestamp for when you debated Deepak Chopra?
You know, I think that was, I'm trying to think, you know, I got it somewhere here. Probably 15 years ago.
Okay.
Maybe 2008 or something like that. Yeah. And I did that for Lee when Lee has a TV show.
Yeah.
And Lee was in one sound stage here in LA, and I was in another sound stage surrounded by curtains. And that I was separated because Deepak was on the East Coast. And so, you know, Lee didn't want me and Lee to be sitting together. So it sounds like it's 2 against 1. And so we were in separate sound stages, and that gave I don't know if you've seen the debate, but we're separated out. It's more like fair play for Deepak.
Yeah.
It didn't go well for Deepak, as it turned out, you know. And it was
No, it did not. No, it did not.
That was supposed to be just a 20-minute interview. And I knew that because the way Lee was doing is he did these 3 20-minute segments. You know, he patched this 1-hour thing with different people. And so I'm carrying on interacting with Deepak, and I'm thinking this is going a lot longer than I thought it should go. And so I just was taking advantage of the time and making my case and engaging. And finally, the hour was up essentially. And what Lee did is he just kept the cameras running. And then after we were all done, he broke through the curtains from the other soundstage. He said, "Oh man, I can't believe it. We just kept it going. We're going to do a whole show just on this." And so that's what he did. But it was a great opportunity, and I think it's an interesting interaction with probably the best known New Age guru in the world still today. He sold 20 million books. In fact, that was the number that he said when we did the debate. 20 million.
Wow.
And it was an interesting little point in the conversation because he was, like a lot of people, he complains that Christians think they're right and other people are wrong. And so that was the detail in the debate. And I said, well, you know, Dr. Chopra, and I always called him Dr. Chopra. I didn't call him Deepak, which I could have, but I didn't want to play into his brand. I wanted to be completely respectful and not play to his brand, strength. So I didn't call him Deepak. But I said, Dr. Chopra, you've written a lot of books, so you sold a lot of books. And then he says 20 million. You know, he offered the number. Oh, okay, thank you very much. All right. You don't sell 20 million books writing about things that you don't think are true. You know, that was the point against. The irony is he was promoting a book at the time, and I wish I had it in my lap. I could have pulled it up, but the book was titled "Love is the Way."
Oh, wow.
So here I am. He's chastising me because I say there's one way, and he has just published the book that says there's one way, his way. You know. But the general issue became a detail of the conversation. And the thing with Dr. Chopra is that, and if you've seen him in other venues, nobody takes exception with him. He never ever gets pushback, partly because his theological view is obscure. It's kind of Eastern, and he can talk a lot of spiritual stuff, but it's kind of hard to know what he's actually saying. I'm not saying this disparagingly of the Dr. Chopra. He's a brilliant guy, but there's a lot of religious words and spiritual sounding sentences, and it's not clear what to make of it. And you could see when he's on Larry King is kind of thinking, oh, next, you know, and he'll go to those other guests. He doesn't know how to respond. So Chopra never had to stand up against anybody that would push back. In this case, he got pushback. And like I said, it did not go well for him, as it turned out.
Why did you debate him? Why did you decide to do that?
Well, I had an invitation from Lee, and Lee was a friend. And I mean, it was an honor to be asked to do this. And it was an opportunity. So if I have a capability, let me back up. There's a proverb. It says in chapter 3 of Proverbs, it says, do not hold back from doing good when it's within your power to do it. Okay. Or something to that effect. Chapter 3 of Proverbs. And so that's kind of an operating principle for me. It's like, well, I get invited to do this. I think I'm up to the task. I'll do my prep and get ready. And God will use it, presumably, if I step out. It's kind of hard for me to campaign for other people to step out also, if I'm not willing to step out, as an example. And so I did. I didn't know entirely what I was going to be up against. I do know that there were a lot of people on the secular crew of the film work that was working with Lee that were big fans of Chopra, and they stayed behind, even if they weren't working that day, to see the interview, because they were there, rooting their guru on, and they were not happy when they left about the way it turned out. Now, I don't, I'm not trying to wave my flag here. People can watch the video; it's on YouTube, and they can judge for themselves. All I did was some ordinary stuff. I pressed some points. I didn't let him get away with making the kinds of claims that are not sound. In fact, there was one point he was making a claim about the Bible and dismissive of its historical reliability. And I said, well, wait a minute, Dr. Chopra, this is my field. And what you just said is, let me give you a line of thinking about how he's late dating all the Gospels. And I'm saying there's good reasons to believe they're early. And I asked him, well, where do you get, where are you getting your information here? He says, Newsweek.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Now, I'll tell you what came into my head, and I didn't say it, which will be for obvious reasons, because it would have been impolitic and impolite. But I said, I could have said, Dr. Chopra, is that where you get your medical information too?
Oof.
No, I didn't say that.
Right.
But it came to mind.
Yeah.
But it would have been an appropriate thing. How do you
Sure.
get on national TV and then make claims about the Bible based on authoritative, dogmatic claims?
Yeah.
Dissing scripture because you read something in Newsweek. Okay, anyway, but I didn't get my information from Newsweek, so I was able to give substantive responses. He did not know what to do with them. He just didn't.
How do you walk into a debate like that with someone who has obscure views? They're not mainstream. They do not fall into the category of even the major, let alone the major religions, but also the major cults. I had a similar conversation recently. I did not know what I was walking into. I tried to do my research beforehand, and I still scratch my head to wonder if I handled it well. Mm-hmm. How do you prepare, or better yet, for a Christian who finds themselves in that kind of discussion where you realize this person believes things that don't fit into any of the major categories? Mm-hmm. How do you respond, handle the discussion without being adequately prepared in advance through your world religions class?
Right. Excellent question, Joel. And the answer is sometimes you can't. Sometimes if you're not adequately prepared and the thing is weird, you don't know where to go. And so that end of issue. All right. However, I'll say something specific about my specific preparation for that particular debate in just a moment. Because you can't go in, you got to respect your opponent. You can't, if you think their ideas are foolish, they're not well grounded, and all that stuff, and it all may be true, but you cannot go in without respecting your opponent, because they hold a position where they hold because they got there, they have capability, skill, whatever, and you can get your head handed to you on a platter if you're not careful. All right. And this is why debates are, I don't like them. I actually don't do them anymore. I just got an offer to do a debate last week. And I said, those days are over. It's too much work right now. I got my hands full with other projects. But I logged my time in, about 10 debates over the years. And this was one of them with Deepak. And so if you find yourself caught up short information wise, you don't understand, well, it makes it a lot harder. Now, if you're using the tactical game plan, there's 3 steps to the game plan. And the first 2 steps, you're gathering different types of information by asking questions. And so this is an excellent time to get into step 1 and step 2 and ask, okay, what do you mean by that? It's a clarification question. And the second one is, how did you come to that conclusion? It's a request for justification for the view. Now, if I don't really understand the view well, I'm going to ask a lot of the first kind of question. Flesh it out for me, cash it out. But I will say, it's interesting we started talking about Schaeffer, because I think what Schaeffer's instruction did for me is it gave me conceptual categories to assess. Okay. And I'll tell you, one of the most powerful things, and this shows up in the book in both the first edition and the 10th anniversary edition. And I mentioned the 10th because I added a chapter that was based more on Francis Schaeffer stuff. So I've got a tactic called Taking the Roof Off, which is a Schaeffer move. That's what he calls it. So I call it the same thing, and I give him credit and I show my application. But then in this 10th anniversary edition, there is a chapter called Inside Out. And Inside Out is it's a tactical maneuver that trades on something that I learned from Schaeffer. Now, here is Schaeffer's basic insight. He said, turns out, as a matter of fact, they have to live in the world that God made, and they are made in the image of God.
Yeah.
If Christianity is true, then this is God's world.
Yeah.
Okay. And by the way, very kin now to a presuppositional look at things. This is God's world. Okay. God's world is not our religious view. God's world is the way reality is structured.
That's
okay.
right.
So I'm not just talking about our point of view versus other people's point of view. If we're convinced our point of view is true, that means it's accurate to the way the world is, story of reality, right? And title of a book I wrote. So I'm just throwing that out. Just saying.
Yeah, throw it out.
It's the way reality is structured. Okay. So that means if somebody is rejecting the Christian worldview at some level, they are rejecting reality. And reality is going to bite them in the butt somewhere along the line. Okay. They're going to bump into reality. Reality is what injures you when you don't take it seriously. Okay.
Yeah.
And I have a talk called Bumping into Reality, which is a talk where I'm dealing with atheism, where there are bumps of reality that atheists can't make any sense of, and we can. Okay. So, and that's what the nature of the talk. But I'm trading on this concept that Schaeffer introduced to me and really found a home in my mind conceptually. It helps me to understand things. The second one, first, we live in God's world. And therefore, if you deny Christianity, you're going to deny some feature of reality, and it's going to be evident. It's going to come out. It's going to come out in your conversation, And then if you're consistent with your foreign worldview, okay, and that's what happens. Everybody complains about the problem of evil, but then you've got atheistic philosophers who are careful thinkers and say, look, there is no such thing as evil.
Yeah.
Because it's just molecules clashing in the universe. So there's, anyway. And so we see this conflict I mentioned with Richard Dawkins, where he says no evil, and then he says God's evil. Wait a minute. Okay, what's it going to be? You got a foot in two worlds. You can't play it in both ways. Now, I noticed that because of Schaeffer's approach. And there's something else, another kind of angle on this whole point, and that is, not only do we live in God's world, but we are also human beings made in the image of God. Okay, now this means there's a bunch of stuff that's already built in. Okay, and this is, all the precepts are going to be happy with this. There are things that are built into us that God built in. The sensus divinitatis, okay, Romans 1, sense of divine, Calvin, and we are suppressing the truth and unrighteousness. Okay, but when they're not consciously suppressing, that is, when they're not guarding turf, it's going to come out.
Yes,
it's going to come out. Okay, so watch this line. Okay, the relativist says there is no objective morality. It's just a matter of personal opinion. So it's wrong for you to push your morality on me.
Right.
Okay. Now, embedded in that sentence is a contradiction.
Yeah.
If he's right about the first part, he cannot be right about the second. It cannot be wrong for me to force my morality on him if morals are simply subjective. Okay. So in the first case, he's speaking from his false philosophy. In the second case, it is the image of God in him that's coming out, because he's a common sense moral realist. Now, his moral assessment wasn't accurate, but that he was making an objectivist kind of moral assessment is a function of the fact that he's made in the image of God and he knows morality is real. and Dawkins did the same thing. Now, these are conceptual elements that I learned from Schaeffer that equip me to deal with any period of time.
Mm-hmm.
So the postmoderns come around. How do we deal with postmoderns? How are you going to deal with the whole chain? Here's the clue. They live in God's world and they're made in the image of God. They can, what I say at the end of that chapter, the Inside Out chapter, is they can run from God, but they can't run from themselves. They can run from God, but they cannot run from themselves. It's all built in already. And if we're alert to that, then we can trade on that in conversations.
This is one of the best conversations about presuppositional apologetics that I've had in a while. But this is why I'm saying, Greg, I'm reading the book and I'm like, okay, here I am on page 180. How reductios work, and I'm like, and I know it's very Schaefferian, as Schaeffer talks about pushing your discussion partner towards the inevitable conclusion. I'm using it in my own words.
Reductio, right?
Yeah, he's doing a reductio and a reductio ad absurdum. Yeah, and so it's just, man, I'm loving it. Would you say that the audience, the proper audience for apologetics, is it unbelievers to convince them or convict them, or is it believers to strengthen?
That's a very perceptive question, Joel. And I think, of course, both are true. I look at J. Warner Wallace, one of my closest friends. Okay. Okay.
He's been on the show twice. He's been on the show twice. So he's got you beat by one so far.
Well, he's a fast talker and he's a quick study man, and he's a lot of fun. He's a tough guy too. He's a cop. If you don't agree with him, you throw him to the mat. Easy.
That's right.
So, but look there's a guy who is a non-Christian who was won to Christ through apologetics. He was challenged by a pastor's statement, and the statement was Jesus was the smartest guy who ever lived, and Jim was an atheist. He said, "No way." And so, but this got him going, and he's a storied cold case detective, never lost a case that has gone to trial, by the way, never lost a single case. He caught the killer bad guys that in cases that have been dead cold for 20, 25, maybe 30 years, and he got them. Okay. So that's Jim. He's a sharp guy. And so there are, I think, Lee also, same kind of thing. And many others who, I think Frank Turek is an example, another close friend. These guys were deeply influenced by apologetics arguments. Okay. However, when I make my case to pastors about the importance of apologetics, what I tell them is that this apologetics are going to help your people face the toughest critic that they will ever face. Who's that? Themselves. And my personal conviction as I kind of survey my impact over what I do is I think I've had more of an impact on Christians than on non-Christians, to stabilize them, to encourage them. And I think this is true of all of us. It's not me personally. It's this discipline. It serves to allay their doubts and give them confidence that their feet are firmly planted on solid ground. Okay. Now, this brings me back to Schaeffer, because I remember, I can picture my exact set of circumstances. I was staying in this fraternity house with a bunch of other Christians. It wasn't a fraternity. It was a Christian community though. And in Westwood Village. And I was reading Schaeffer, The God Who Is There, or Escape from, I don't know what it was, one of the trilogy, Escape from Reason, or He Is There and He's Not Silent. Maybe it was that one. And he's making this kind of philosophical argument, philosophic necessities for God's existence. Never heard any of this before. And I remember looking out the window, reflecting on what Schaeffer said. And what I thought was, man, this stuff is really true. This stuff is really true. Mm-hmm. So, of course, I had already committed my life to Christ. I was a regenerate Christian. But there was a sense that I had a much deeper foundation securing confidence of the truthfulness, capital T, truthfulness of Christian theism. And that did wonders for my confidence as a follower of Christ. And I think that I'm not the only person who has that kind of experience when they engage in apologetics. And then they realize, wow, this is really true.
Yeah.
When you realize it's really true, it has an impact on you. It not only emboldens you more with other people, it makes you more comfortable in the face of attack. Okay. But it makes you want to persevere, because you realize that this 4 score and 10 we have here can get really hard, but that's all right, because this isn't where it's all really happening. This is preparation for eternity. As one of my mentors, J.P. Moreland, says, this life is to make us fit to spend eternity with God. So there's a sanctification element here, which means this life is going to be hard. Life is hard, and then you die. I mean, there you go. But when you die, it's not over, it's beginning.
Amen.
And you're making an investment in this life, an investment. It's like a 401k. You're packing it away for the life to come. And this is very clear theme in Scripture. Godliness, physical exercise profits little, but godliness is a means of great gain, for it holds a promise, not just for this life, but also for the life to come. I think that's 1 Timothy chapter 3 or 4, something like that. But notice, it's like it puts it all in a proper perspective. And when you are convinced that that perspective, that eternal perspective, is accurate, you can live with the momentary light affliction, as Paul puts it in 2 Corinthians 4, that is producing the eternal way to glory, which Lewis wrote about. A wonderful text with that title, Way to Glory.
Mm-hmm.
So these things all are tied together for me, and I'm just deeply influenced by the apologetics to strengthen me. And I think that's my suspicion is it has had a stronger role, bigger role in the lives of Christians than non-Christians. That's fine with me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I'm not an evangelist at heart, Joel. I'm a discipleship is what drives me, not evangelism, which people are surprised about.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool, man. If we had more time, I think we have a lot in common there, Greg. It's great to hear that. You said that when you were an atheist, you said that the intellectual stuff was the cover. How common is that for non-Christians in your experience?
First of all, I wasn't an atheist, just to be clear.
I'm sorry.
I was a non-believer.
A non-believer. You're right.
I thought something was going on. I wasn't a materialist. I mean, honestly, I didn't think it through that much to be able to put it in those categories, but I wasn't an atheist who became a Christian.
That's right. When you were
just a guy who's doing my own thing, and I had some of these ideas about in the spiritual realm, what it was all about, Alfie, what's it all about? Okay. But I mentioned about the cover, and I guess, to put it simply, the appeal for me was just doing my own thing. I wanted to be master of my own fate. I had a very domineering father. I broke away from that. I'm my own guy. I worked my way through. I went to the military. I worked my way through school. After I was 19, I didn't get a dime from my dad. They didn't do anything. I was my own. I did it myself. Okay. And traveled all around the country and went to a whole bunch of different schools and finally got a degree. But when I finally became a Christian, then I ended up getting a degree in the Bible. But I wanted to be the captain of my own ship. And I thought I was on that until some really hard things hit my life, and it had to do with a relationship. My high school sweetheart, after 5 years, that was over with. Now, that didn't bring me to God, but what it did is it gave me a sense of how empty or inadequate my own philosophies were to try to help me deal with that kind of thing. I call it cosmic alienation, was the word I used. You're all alone in the universe. Boy, that's painful to think of it that way. And so that was before I began thinking about Christ seriously, but that was a wake-up call for me about personal autonomy. And kind of existentialism. You make your own life. The choices you make are what brings meaning to your life, So, that was kind of a wake-up call. But as I look back on it now, it's really clear. I had some fair challenges regarding religion, and I consider those challenges fair now, but they have answers to them. But that wasn't the real issue. It wasn't like I'm looking for God. I was looking for love. I wasn't looking for God. I was looking for love. And I don't mean sex here. I was looking for a woman to be the center of my life. So that's what motivated me.
Well, thank you for sharing that. When we're talking about strategy, Greg, it can be tempting for a lot of Christians, it can be very tempting to want a list, an apologetics catechism. If they ask this, you say that. If step by step. And yet on page 29 of Tactics, you say not to let the catchphrases do the work that careful, thoughtful conversation should be doing instead.
Mhm.
How do we prepare and have ready answers without resorting to catchphrases when there is such a wide expanse of different viewpoints out there? How do we adequately prepare if catchphrases aren't the answer?
Well, I think one way to prepare is you have to narrow the field down. I'm a generalist, and so is like somebody like Lee and Frank Turek and Jay Warner. We're all kind of generalists. Then you got Stephen Meyer, who I've known for over 30 years, and he's the deep dive in the science stuff, and he's magnificent. And so that's where he spends the majority of his time. So he's got his lane, to use Jay Warner's language. I got my lane, okay, and we each kind of have our own lane. Now, if you're know what your lane is, or you just want to get better at this, then choose some issue that is the trouble for you right now. If you're dealing with this challenge, maybe science is the challenge right now. Challenge you personally, or challenge from your friends. Okay, there's where you grab one of Stephen Meyer's books, or someone like him from the Discovery Institute. I think those guys are great, and then do that, and then. That's the way I did it. I jumped from topic to topic. I thought, okay, I know the problem of evil is a problem. I've got to figure out. I got to work this out. I want to work out a talk and make it happen. And I worked a talk out in the 80s, and I still give them the same talk. But I've added some new angles to it as I've learned more. But I start with what interests you. You can't get it all right away. You know that. Start with what interests you, and then work with that. So that's on a topical basis. Narrow the field down, and don't worry about covering everything. You're not going to be able to do it. I can't still, after all these years, I still can't cover all the bases, and I get out of my ken to some degree. So that's one thing. Secondly, and this goes to the issue of the debate like I had with Deepak Chopra. I had a little sense in the direction the questions were going. Lee helped me out a little bit there, but even so, I had to figure out what Deepak was all about and the kinds of things he might. I knew the topic, and it was like the future of truth or future of religion or something like that. So I knew in general, and so did he, where we were going. And then I just had to figure out, like you said, well, if they say this, I say this. That's what you do have to do in a circumstance like that. And there's actually nothing wrong with that, because after a while, you work with that, those things get internalized. And I do have that in the tactics book. And I'm actually just finishing a manuscript, God willing, this week, that on a new work that'll be out next summer, where I go into that kind of approach in more detail. So it's called Street Smarts. And the subtitle is Using Questions to Answer Christianity's Toughest Challenges. So you encounter an atheist, okay? You have to know in your head, what are the liabilities of atheism? What are the problems? and once you know them, then you can construct a kind of a little step-by-step set of questions or engagement that will allow you to exploit or employ your understanding of the problems with atheism in a conversation. And this is where the tactical steps actually come in. In this book, I take the tactical steps I taught in the last book, the tactics book, and I play them out with certain topics, okay, like atheism, or with the problem of evil, or with science and Christianity, or with problems in the Bible, or abortion, or these are the homosexuality, gender, and all of that. Okay. Oh, first you got to figure out the answers to these things, and I spend time in the chapters doing that. And this is what you got to do. You can't face guys who oppose you unless you know their views and what's wrong with them. You can't face them successfully. Yeah. And this is where the preparation is really critical. And so I do research, I write questions out. I think, okay, I know I debated Michael Shermer, and I listened to a number of debates of Michael's, and he does the same thing every time. He does exactly the same thing every time. And so I know what I'm going to face. And so since I know what he's going to say, I can prepare a response. So I'll give you an example of this. Okay?
Yeah, please.
Michael Shermer always raises the issue. He says, well, who created God? And a lot of really smart people raise that dumb question.
Yeah.
Okay?
Man, Greg, I never thought about that. Who who did create God?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. You got me. I'm stumped. Okay. Now, this is an example of complex question, by the way.
Mhm.
In other words, it presumes an answer to a prior question.
Right.
Like, are you still beating your wife? Is a classic example.
Yeah.
Well, it presumes you're beating your wife. But the question, who created God, presumes that God was created. Now you're asking who did that. But the classical Christian view is that God's eternal. It's not even a question that applies to us. And there's no reason it would apply to us. And people who are reasonable, thoughtful, would never ask such a question because it's so, okay, I know I'm going to face this. Okay. So here's what I thought to say. And actually, I was able to use it. Michael raised the issue. And I said, Michael, you don't believe God was created because you're an atheist. I don't believe God was created because he's eternal. Nobody in this conversation believes God was created. So why are you asking who created him? Okay, now notice how I ended with a question. That tosses the ball back in his court.
Oh,
that's
that's
the
good.
tactical maneuver. But that issue was over with by the way that I addressed it.
How did he reply?
I don't remember.
Okay. I need to watch that.
How would anybody reply? It's we make an argument for God based on the beginning of the universe. It's a cosmological argument, classically known as the Columbo cosmological argument. Things that come into being have a cause. I mean, that's the foundation of that. And the response is, well, then who created God? Well, wait a minute. Our view is those things that come into being have a cause, like the universe. But who on the planet believes that if there is the kind of God that we believe in, he's the kind of God who needed a creator? Nobody believes that.
Yeah.
No atheist believes that.
Yeah.
I mean,
How many corners?
But
Sorry.
this is rhetoric. This is all this is.
That's good.
It's foot play, And so if you think about it in advance, you're aware of it, you won't get caught.
How many corners does the circle have?
Yeah, that's right.
How many wives does the bachelor have?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Exactly.
Exactly. You might be best known for the Columbo tactic, which it's really regrettable that more people aren't watching Columbo these days. Because
get him. He's on. You can go to YouTube. You can. Find him.
Absolutely, and you can watch him. I think he's on. And he's streaming too. I've definitely watched several episodes recently.
Yeah.
Can you tell us, for our listener who is unaware of the Columbo tactic, you've already kind of fleshed it out. Could you give us a brief introduction to that, and then
of course. And
how'd you develop it?
I used the name Columbo tactic because of the TV character, and I developed this moniker about 20 years ago when he was a little better known. We just passed the 50th anniversary of that program, and here it's a murder detective called Detective Columbo, and he's a uninspiring looking individual. Okay, he shows up at the crime scene. He's got a rumpled trench coat. And by the way, when I do this on stage, I put my trench coat on. He's got a cigar. I pull my cigar out. So I do the deal. And he, he looks like he can't think his way out of a wet paper bag, right? He's walking around mumbling to himself, scratching his head, like really confused, right? And then he says, trademark move, there's something about this thing that bothers me. Do you mind if I ask you a question, right? So he asked the question, and then he goes, okay, one more thing. And then one more things him to death, right? With these question after question after question. And the idea here is that what Lieutenant Columbo is doing is he's first gathering information, but now he's starting to figure things out, but he's not accusing anybody. He's coming in under the radar. He's not scary. Don't have to take this guy seriously. Okay, the bad guy, we know who the bad guy is, the way the film show is set up. The murderer right from the very beginning, and he's not worried about Columbo until Columbo gets him, and then it's over with, And so the idea here is two things with Columbo. You have a game plan, so to speak, where you're using questions to gather information to create a foundation for you. All right, and also another thing that Columbo is doing is he's enlisting the murderer, or the person he thinks is the murderer, as an ally by the kinds of questions he asks. Then the guy gives him all this information.
Yeah.
Okay. And of course, the pieces don't fit together because the guy's guilty and he's lying. And so and at the end, all right. But there's also a kind of a stylistic thing, and that is the unassuming, innocent-looking, non-threatening approach of a guy just, something about this thing bothers me. Help me out. Help me understand this. And I think that's a very good style when we're in conversations with people about issues that could be very controversial. So we just relax. By the way, when we adopt that style, it makes it a lot easier for us.
How so?
It's much more relaxing. It's just more simple. Let me ask you a question about this. If I were to talk with you, Joel, I said, you said something a while ago, and I'm not entirely clear on what you meant by that. Could you help me out? Help me understand that. Oh, sure. Joel, you want to tell me your point of view? You're ready to talk about it, so you talk about it. Now I'm listening.
Yeah.
And I may ask more questions, but I'm gathering information now because I know that even though you're reject Christian theism, you're a human being made in the image of God and you live in God's world. And you're going to start popping out with things that are not going to fit your worldview, that are going to fit mine. And I can now use them. Well, you said this thing. I thought you were an atheist. Yeah, I am. Well, but you say the God of the Bible is evil. Well, where are you getting the standard to judge him by? I'm confused about that. Now it's their turn. Okay, now what? See, the crickets right there, the silence. That's what happens a lot of times. I call it Simon and Garfunkel moment. Those guys who wrote the songs Sounds of Silence, 1966. They're still alive, by the way, but they're really, really old. They're older than me. So this is kind of how sometimes why I chose Columbo, because I did not think of the idea from Columbo. I was using these things myself, and I realized Columbo is a great characterization of it. So there's a heuristic value, a teaching instructional value. So now they got a picture of somebody, and even if they don't know who Columbo is, and I was at University of Texas a couple of years ago and giving a talk about Columbo as a Christian group, and how many people have heard of Lieutenant Columbo? Not a single hand went up. Not a single one. Undergrads, right? Not a single hand. Okay, but then I do my thing and I do my characterization, and it's a lot of fun, and they're laughing because I put my cigar out and all this, and I speak into the mic and I do my little impersonation, and then I go on with the tactic. So it's a tool to help teach the tactic in a more memorable fashion. So that's Lieutenant Columbo.
So what's the story of? Well, I guess you said how you developed it. What are some other questions that you use in that information gathering phase?
Well, the questions in the game plan, they are, I have in the first, there's 3 steps. And in the first 2 steps, I have model questions that fit the maneuver, the purpose of that step. All right. But these are flexible questions. And I mentioned them earlier, so I'll just repeat them because they're really important. The first question you're going to gather, the first thing you're going to do in any conversation before you think about anything else, don't think about sharing the gospel. Don't think about winning people to Christ. Don't think about objections that may come up. Don't think about any of that. You're way ahead of the game and you're just complicating it. Just think about gathering information. You're going to get some intel. Okay. You're in a new country. You're looking around, trying to figure things out. What is the lay of the land? How do you do that? You ask questions, and you ask questions to gather information. And the key question that I suggest is some form of the question, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? Okay. So when I ask the atheist, hey, where are you getting you think God is bad? Well, that's confusing. You're an atheist, right? Well, where are you getting the standard to judge God as bad, given your atheism? That's confusing to me. Okay, now that's just a clarification question. It's just a what do you mean by that kind of question? All right. And the second step, once if I'm talking about their worldview or their point of view, and they lay it out, and my questions give me a clear understanding of what they believe, now I want to know why they believe it. Now, I think Lee calls this the golden rule of apologetics, that you ask of them the way they ask of you. They're always asking you why. Why can't we ask them why?
Yeah.
And the key here, of course, is if we're asking those kinds of questions to get deeper understanding about the view, we don't have any burden on us. It's easy. We're relaxed. We're listening. It's a pleasant conversation. And I don't know where I'm going to go from here because I don't know what they're going to say.
Yeah.
But I determine where I'm going to go based on what they do say. Okay. And so that's kind of how this plays out. And so if they say, I'm an atheist, then I would say, why? What are your reasons? The Bible's been changed. What we have now is not the same as what was written 2,000 years ago. Really? How'd you find that out? So this is a variation of the question, how did you come to that conclusion? All right? So you keep the model question in your head, but then you modify it for the circumstances that you're facing.
Yeah.
How does that work here? Okay. And the third step, by the way, those are basics. Anybody can do that. You don't need any skill. You don't need any theology, no philosophy, no apologetics.
Right.
Okay. But I'll tell you something, Joel, and this is something you can take to the bank. If you just become a student of a person's point of view with those two questions, you will be absolutely amazed at what God does, even though you're not witnessing with apologetics. Okay, because my goal in any conversation is to what I call put a stone in their shoe. I want to get them thinking. That's all. I'm not looking to close the deal. I don't know where it's going to go. I may not even get to the gospel, but I want to say something that gets them thinking, to question their own view, maybe, or maybe to think more positively about the Christian view. Okay, that's it. So my bar is low for me, and it's just amazing. I'll give you one illustration. I was going to say, it's amazing how just these questions are powerful enough to get people really thinking hard about their own view. Okay. So I'm in Seattle. 2 years ago, I had just done a Friday night and an all day Saturday conference. I think Lee might have been, I'm not sure. There were other guys that were there, but I worked hard. Sunday morning, I'm going to preach at a local Calvary chapel. I'm in a hotel. I'm leaving early, grabbing a coffee and a bite to eat on my way out. And just for the record, I'm not a morning person. Okay. So I'm sitting down and I do not want to talk about God. I do not want to talk about Jesus. I do not want to talk about the gospel. I don't want to talk. I just want to order my scrambled eggs and my toast and my coffee and be left alone. And this waitress comes up to me and she's far too energetic for that time of day for me. And she's asking, "Oh, how are you doing?" And doing all this number. And what are you doing in Seattle? And why are, so I figure I'll get rid of her. I'll tell her, I'm going to go preach in a church. I think that'll get rid of her, right? No, she says, "Oh, that's great." I said, "That's great." I'm thinking in my mind, that's great. Oh, maybe she's a Christian. Are you a Christian? So I'm asking for clarification. Now, notice I am not trying to witness, but I can't help but asking the clarification question.
Right.
Are you a Christian? No, I'm not a Christian. I used to be a Christian, but I'm not. She says that. She said, "Now the universe takes care of me." That's what she said. See, look in your face. It's like, that's what I thought. Huh?
Yeah.
What's that? And that's what I said. How does the universe take care of you? Is the universe a person? I just asked that. She said, "No, the universe is not a person." I said, "Well, then how can the universe take care of you?" And then she's thinking. She said, "Well, God takes care of me." Oh, okay. Well, that makes sense. I got it. And then she says, "God is the universe." And I'm thinking, huh? So I asked her, how is God the universe? I just asked her that. And again, remember, I'm not trying to trap her. I'm not trying to witness. I don't know what she's talking about. And I'm just asking for clarification. So she continues with some more of this really a new age mumbo jumbo. And I don't mean to be disparaging, but it just didn't make any sense. And a lot of times you talk to new age people, this is the comment I made about Deepak Chopra. It just, what does he mean? I don't know. So finally she left. Thank God she's gone. She got my eggs, coffee, whatever. And I'll tell you, now here's the postscript. Here's the payoff. She comes up to my table to give me the check. And she says this: "Nobody has ever asked me any questions about my view before." And then she says, and that got me thinking. And it got me thinking. And of course, that's my goal with the tech. I just want to get them thinking. I want to put a stone in their shoe. If I can go further, great. But if that's all I do, good. I'm a happy camper. All right. She said, it got me thinking. And then I said to her, "Well, I have to leave. But if I had more time, I could ask you more questions and you could do more thinking," is what I said to her, And so, but there's an example. I didn't even want to talk about God. But I'm employing the first step of the game plan just because I'm confused about what she's saying, and God used it. Now, it turned out I had a copy of Story of Reality, which is a book on basic Christianity that I wrote. It's a worldview. I might see if I get out there. Here you go. And I had it in my bag. I always carry one with me. And so I said, if I gave you a book, would you be interested in reading it? And then I told her, if you say no, you're not going to hurt my feelings. She said, sure. And so I gave her the book. She said, oh, thank you. And I said, by the way, I wrote that. Oh my goodness. She's really, can you sign it? And so I figured that guaranteed that she was going to read it. But at least I was able to leave something behind that has some substance about the Christian worldview that maybe God will use after I'm completely out of her life.
Yeah.
There's one of many examples I could give you that of how God used just the first step of the game plan, even when I wasn't trying. And people who even say want to try out the first couple of steps and stay in the shallow end of the pool, I'm basically promising you'll be amazed about what God will do if you just start doing this. Just the first 2 steps.
So something else that I really enjoyed in your book is something, Greg, this is something that I've internalized myself. I will tell you, I actually forgot that I learned this from your book. I've just been doing this since I learned it. And that is pitting the challenger against Jesus rather than against you.
Right.
Can you talk to us about that? And how did you come up with that?
Yeah. Well, that was my approach, my strategic approach in dealing with Deepak Chopra. I mean, I made a conscious thought. I mentioned some preparation. You're thinking about the questions that might come up, and then how you might respond in principle, at least. So you've got a head start on that. But I also had a strategic approach. Now, Deepak Chopra is the 20 million books at the time. He's the best known New Age guru in the world. He's been everywhere. Everybody knows him. Who's interested in that kind of stuff. And Greg Koukl is. Who? Who's this guy? Okay. So this is Deepak Chopra, or let me just say Deepak, because he's one of the few people in the world that is recognizable as himself just by his first name. Okay. So here's Deepak and nobody. So I realized that I'm at a strategic disadvantage right out of the gate. And this is why, as I mentioned earlier, I think I made a choice not to call him Deepak. But there was an interview I had just before this one, so maybe I'm reflecting back in the earlier interview. But I made a choice. I'm not going to call him Deepak. I'm not going to play to his brand. I'm going to call him Dr. Chopra.
How can you explain that?
Well, Deepak is his brand. He's Deepak.
Okay.
His first his like Cher Bono, Cher, like Rush Limbaugh, Rush. There are people whose first name is their brand. Okay, that's their strength. All right, Deepak is like that. You just say his name and people know who that is. Right. So why should I say, okay, Deepak, which first of all is a familiar way to address him, and it might seem inappropriate because he's, and it is also playing into his strength, his brand. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to call him Dr. Chopra every time. So what am I doing? I'm being polite and deferential to the good doctor, and I'm not playing into his brand. So that's a strategic move. But the other thing is, I did not want to pit Dr. Chopra against Greg Koukl because I'm going to lose. All right. I mean, just in a sense, because of the branding and name recognition. And everything like that. I wanted to pit Dr. Chopra against Jesus of Nazareth. Yeah. Okay. So Dr. Chopra would say this. I said, well, this is Dr. Chopra's view, but this is Jesus' view. I haven't looked at the video in a long time, so I don't know how many times I actually made that move, but that was part of my strategy. Pit him against Jesus, not against me. Now, he is deferential to Jesus, as most people are. And he even said, and here's where I missed an opportunity. He said he keeps a copy of the Sermon on the Mount in his pocket everywhere he goes.
Right.
Okay. I could have said, oh yeah, can I see it?
Ooh, you know what? I just watched it today, and I was thinking, I'm like, there's no way. It would have been amazing if you had. I totally understand why you didn't. But if you had said, oh, yeah, where is it? I'd love to take a look.
Yeah, okay. But here's what I missed, though. Later on, somewhere in the conversation, he's late dating the Gospels, And he's saying you can't trust what you read in the Gospels because it's been changed, and he called it like the 13th iteration or something like
The
that.
19th, the King James version is the 19th iteration of
Yeah.
the New
Okay. So
Testament.
you
Yeah.
remember it better than I do because you were just watching
I
it.
just
But
watched it.
I don't even know. And that's when I asked him, what does he mean? I think I asked him about what iteration. Now I knew what he was getting at in general, but he's offering this information to disqualify the Bible as a source of information. All right. But wait a minute. This is the guy who just said that he keeps a chunk of that thing in his pocket.
Right.
Now that's where I could have said, now I'm confused, Dr. Chopra. You're saying right now you can't rely on the information, right? But you also told us earlier that you're carrying a chunk of that information in your pocket because it's so great as a characterization of Jesus' teachings. So is it reliable or not? Help me understand this. Now, it's a fair question. I could have asked that, and I would have, because I don't think that would have been uncharitable. But like it might have been uncharitable to say, "Oh, produce it,"
Yeah.
liar, liar, pants on fire. I don't. That's okay. But to point out the inconsistency would have been appropriate. I forgot that. I missed it. I didn't catch it until later. I thought about it later. But there's an example of how a person just makes a faux pas, a mistake, and I just missed it. Okay, that's all right. But that's the kind of thing in those circumstances you want to be alert for, but you don't catch them all the time. You catch them after it's all over and you go, oh man, I missed my opportunity.
Yeah.
But so the maneuver here is to I call it "What a Friend We Have in Jesus." That's the title of the tactic. So you let Jesus do your fighting for you. Okay. So Jesus, people say, "Oh, you're bigoted Christians." What do you mean bigoted? Notice the question. What do you mean by that? Well, you think your way is the only way. Well, actually, that's not my view. That's Jesus' view. Jesus was the one who said it. Do you think Jesus is wrong? Oh, now they got to say that Jesus is wrong, not Koukl is wrong, which was the maneuver I was trying to do with Dr. Chopra. Or one time somebody sent us a note, their daughter, this was about 5 years ago or 6 years ago, before Obergefell SCOTUS, the Supreme Court decision about same-sex marriage. And contestants for a beauty contest were being asked about their views about same-sex marriage. And so a father writes us and he says, my daughter's going to be in a statewide beauty pageant. And I know they're going to ask this question. How can she answer it and still keep her, keep her integrity? And so I said, here's how you do. And I think this is in the 10th anniversary. I do make a reference to this under the category of what a friend we have in Jesus. And I said, you have your daughter say, when they say, what is your view of marriage? What do you think of same-sex marriage? Or however the question goes, you say, I have the same view of marriage that Jesus has. Then they say, well, what view is that? You say, you can find it in Matthew 19, and I'll just sum it up for you. And this is the way I sum it. It's very summarized. It's very easy to remember. Jesus' view is one man with one woman becoming one flesh for one lifetime. One man with one woman. Notice that's binary sexuality, by the way, gender, because he's gone all the way back to the beginning. Yeah. He's gone back to Genesis chapter 2. One man with one woman becoming one flesh for one lifetime. That's my view. And just let it lie. So then if people object, now they're objecting to Jesus. I don't actually know how that played out for her, but that was my counsel, and I think it's still good counsel today. Let them fight against Jesus.
Love it. Your book is accessible to anybody, but what is the special responsibility that fathers have in their homes with their families to train their children to lead their families in being able to give this kind of defense?
Well, I think that's it's hard for me to say this because in this area, to be quite candid, I have not been very successful in my own family. I'm just saying, okay? And ironically, I'm not the only person who's in my circumstances that is do what I do who's have trouble here. But certainly, and that's because kids are individuals, certainly we have this responsibility to disciple our families as men, as fathers, as husbands, okay? There's going to be various opportunities or varied success rates with that because of I don't know if you're married, but the families are hard. Kids are hard. Marriages are hard. especially if you're in Christian work, you're standing in the line of fire, and there are all kinds of
Okay.
things that are going to happen that just come out of nowhere, and you've got to manage and you got to deal with. Okay, so I'll give you. So I'm affirming the responsibility. The tactics book proper is not going to help kind of develop or initiate a process of discipleship. I'll talk about that in a moment. What the tactics is going to be helpful for is at some stage of discipleship with a young person, where, and this is probably more in the rhetoric stage of their learning, if you're using the
Yeah,
um,
the classical.
the classical 3-part. I can't think of that
Why
word. I keep thinking triumvirate.
trivium?
That's not the
I
right
was
word.
thinking triumvirate too. Yeah, trivium.
Trivium, the trivium model. So this is be more in a high school stage, a late middle school or high school, where the engagement begins to take place. And people who have teenagers, you know what that is. It's like 13, 14. Now they start arguing with you. Okay, well, that's the rhetoric stage. Okay. If there's been a process of discipleship up to then, this is an opportunity to give tools, tactical tools that will help them in this engagement they have with others. That's where the tactical things work in. However, if you have not, for whatever reason, built up to that stage, you're not going to start with discipleship with tactics.
Right.
It's you got to start somewhere else. So I do have some advice based on my own reflections of my own inadequacies. Let's put it that way. And I think there are three main things that I would say here, and this would apply to dads, moms, and grandparents in the unique role that grandparents have in their relationship with their grandchildren. But it's more applicable to moms and dads because they're 24/7 in situ. You know, they're in place there with their family. Okay.
Right.
Here's the first thing: start early. You want to start early with a plan of some sort of spiritual investment in the lives of the children. And I'm not talking about church on Sunday. That's important, but that's the pastor's doing the work. I mean, where dad takes the lead to guide and invest in the family in a spiritual fashion. Okay. So for example, you have dinner, you know, and you finish dinner, you clear the table before anybody goes to the TV set. We're taking 10 minutes and we're going to read a portion of scripture or something like that. And dad will talk about it a little bit, or a section of Proverbs or something. There's a piece of time where you're plugging spiritual life into those kids that becomes a constant thing. And that's the first thing is start early. The second thing is you have to be consistent. Now, some of you might be thinking ahead a little bit. Oh, I get where he's going. If you build this as a consistent habit, by the time they're teenagers, it's a part of their existence. Okay. So this is the way we do things here at our family. And we've always done them this way, and it's ordinary. And so you don't have to start with a teenager who's already saying, I want to be with my friends. I want to get on my phone. I want to do this, that. And the other thing is all these other things working against you. You build it in. Okay. So you start early. And what that looks like can be different for different people. And it could be scripture. It could be, I got an author friend, Natasha Crane. And Natasha has written a bunch of books for parents to help them disciple kids in apologetics. And she's got little vignettes. They're little lessons. Keeping Your Kids on God's Side is her first book, for example. She's actually written a number. She's just finished her fourth book. And but this is turnkey stuff. You know, it's 10, 15 minutes. Plug it in. If you're homeschoolers, it's easy to do that. If not, do it in the evening, but be consistent. Start early, be consistent, and you got to have two, mom and dad. Mom and dad. You have to have the same commitment to this consistent investment. So when dad goes out of town or he's late at work, who's at the helm? Mom. But there's a consistency there. Okay. That would be my recommendation. The consistency. Okay. And I, as a grandparent, I don't know. I've got a 17-year-old and a 14-year-old. I'm 72. I'm probably not going to be a grandparent. I don't know. You know, I won't have that particular role. I have the role of my own children. But as a grandparents, you have a unique role in, kids like to see their grandparents usually if you're not too grumpy, and grandparents spoil their grandkids. Try to keep spiritual things as part of the deal. Okay, we're gonna read this Bible passage. Here's this kid's Bible. Okay, this is what we're gonna do. Every time you get together with Grandpa, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna have 10 minutes. We're gonna read this thing. We're gonna have fun doing it. Got to make
Yeah.
it fun. I'd say something like that and try to keep it consistent. And history is filled with examples of peoples who are powerful Christian leaders, have a great impact, who look back at an aunt or a grandmother or a grandfather who had the biggest impact in their life spiritually. So you can have a tremendous impact if you take the opportunity to do it, but it's not easy.
Amen. All right, I've got a couple of questions. Thank you for that, by the way. That's very, very powerful. I've got a couple of questions from our community online, which is called the Think Squad, and I'll just we're almost out of time, so maybe I'll just try to pick like one, maybe two, depending on how fast they go. Would that be all right?
Yeah, sure, no worries.
Okay, so my friend Khaldun Swice, who is an apologist and philosophy professor, he wanted me to ask you about miracles. Here's what he says. Ask him about miracles, not the philosophy of it, the practical evidence of it. Keener's book is anecdotal evidence at best. We have YouTube, we have everyone in the world or the Western world has a camera, but the lack of evidence for miracles, real miracles of the Moses and Elijah variety, like regrowing limbs, people rising from the dead, the evidence of the righteous work of God in the physical world in miracles is shockingly unavailable. Why?
All right. I'm a little surprised what sounded like a dismissal of Craig Keener's 2-volume work, which was unbelievable. It's magnificent as being anecdotal. All reports of miracles are anecdotal. Somebody said, where's the scientific evidence for it? You don't have scientific evidence for miracles. You have testimony. It's not the kind of thing that you have scientific evidence for. And the question is the testimony reliable? And when something miraculous happens in somebody's life, or this is the claim, and then they stake their life on it, like a Muslim who has a supernatural encounter that convinces them that Christianity is true, and then becomes Christian in the midst of a vigilant Muslim community, especially outside of this country, that's dangerous. But they're willing to do that. Okay, I don't need some person in a white coat to tell me that was a veridical experience, that really happened. I can tell it really happened based on the behavior of the person who believed it really happened. They're staking their life on it. What more evidence can you have for it? So all evidence for miracles is going to be anecdotal. Even if a doctor comes up, he says, we took a test before you had cancer, then you got prayed for, and it's not showing up anymore. That's okay, a doctor, but that's anecdotal. That's an occasion of the miracle, and we are verifying that it actually took place. Now, Keener's book is 2 volumes. I'm trying to think of where it is. It's 2 volumes of that going all the way back to the 1st century. The 2 volumes destroy Hume's argument against miracles. It destroys it. Your friend's a philosopher. What Hume says, well, I mean, it's basically the idea of a miracle is so unusual, it never happens, so you're never justified in believing it. I mean, this is a very ham-handed characterization of his argument, but Keener says that they don't almost never happen. They may not end up on YouTube. So what? If you have reliable testimony, you have good reason to believe that they're veridical. Okay, so this goes to the issue of the fact of miracles through all different periods of history. And just because they're not happening in this country doesn't mean they're not happening in other places of the world. Okay. Now, some might think, oh, that's kind of lame evidence. Okay. Well, it's going to be hard to convince an atheist skeptic that somewhere in Africa that somebody was raised from the dead. All right. They're just not going to believe it. And I'll tell you why they're not going to believe it. It's because their worldview does not allow it.
That's right.
When Christopher Hitchens was debating J. Wesley Richards, J. Richards wrote the book with Guillermo Gonzalez on Privileged Planet, design argument, powerful. and during a Q&A session of the debate, I just watched this last week. Chris Hitchens says to Jay Richards, the Christian theist, he says, "Do you believe in the virgin birth?" He said, "Yes." "Do you believe in the resurrection?" "Yes." And then Chris Hitchens says, "I rest my case." Wait, rest what case? The debate here is whether Christian theism is true over atheism. You presume the truth of atheism to disqualify the claim of your opponent. That's circular reasoning, right? Okay.
Yes. Well, right. Yes.
It happens all the time.
Yeah.
Why? That couldn't have been true. Why not? Because atheism is true.
Right.
Well, that's circular. You have to look at the circumstances on their own and the evidence. And this is why I think Keener has done a fabulous job, because it's encyclopedic. There's gazillions of words, millions of words in these 2 volumes, small print, and there are many footnotes as there are text in this book. So I would not be dismissive of Keener, but I think it is a fair question. Why don't we see some of these things more often? And I think part of the reason is that miracles in any age are rare. If you look in the biblical testimony, the miracles show up at unusual times, in very particular times in history. So you have a prophetic period where a lot of miracles happen. Elijah, Elisha. Most of the prophets won't work in miracles. Okay. Moses. Okay. Elijah, Elisha, Jesus of Nazareth. Okay. Those are pivotal points in history. And so because for God's purposes, those are the times where there were lots more miracles bringing verification of claims, especially in the life of Jesus. The Apostle John writes at the end of the gospel, "Many other signs and wonders Jesus performed that I have not included in this book." 7 miracles in the Gospel of John, but these I have included in order that you would believe that Jesus is the Son of God, and in believing of life, his Messiah. Jesus the Christ, the Son of God, and in believing of life in his name. So John was an evidentialist, and he writes his whole gospel to give evidences for why people should believe Jesus was who he claimed to be. And and then he says, if I were to include all the things he did, they'd fill all the books of the world, So he's speaking hyperbolically there, but nevertheless, there were a lot of miracles that Jesus did. And every gospel's filled with them, and every take in the gospels, even the Jesus seminar trimmed out all of this stuff. The Jesus that's left is still a miracle working Jesus. All right, why? Because it's testifying to his messianic claims. After that, early church, you got some things happening, but it seems to taper off. Why? Well, that's God's business. But it doesn't mean we don't have good reason to believe the things that took place or the occasions when miracles do happen, rarely nowadays. All right. And I think there's something else going on here. I'll just offer this thought, Joel. There was an anecdote, and I might have included it in the tactics book. I can't remember, but it was a joke about, or not a joke. It was a challenge by an atheistic professor, and he holds up a piece of chalk, and he says, "If there is a God, God will stop this chalk from hitting the ground." And he drops the piece of chalk and it hits the ground. Okay. And say, therefore, there is no God, because he didn't intervene. And this approach is foolish. Okay. As if God is a circus animal who's going to hop to any other demand that this guy has for proof of his existence. It's not even a good test too, because I could say, if they're, let's do that again. And walk up and professor, do that again. And said, okay. Then he does it again. And I reach out and I catch the chalk. There you go. That proves God exists. It didn't hit the ground, did it?
Right.
Because God used me to stop the chalk. Hey, it's nonsense. It's just silly. But it's this kind of silliness that I don't think God is the least bit interested in responding to.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, yeah. Well, and the very fact that the professor assumes the uniformity in nature, that gravity is going to continue on into the future. He's relying on the Christian worldview.
Yes,
anyway.
Right. I agree. There's your transcendental kind of approach. So I'm not sure what to say to your philosopher friend, but I think that Keener's book does a great job. I think David Hume's argument against miracles has lots of problems, and people have addressed the argument proper. But Keener's book, on a straightforward evidential basis, demonstrates that accounts of miracles are veridical, they're true, and these have happened for thousands of years, and especially in modern times, we still see this happening. But we all acknowledge as Christians that this isn't standard fare. Maybe if you're Pentecostal, you think these are going to happen every day. That's not my view, and that didn't happen in the Bible, and not even in the Book of Acts.
Yeah.
And these seem to be rare occurrences for specific purposes. And there's plenty of other evidence that's not miraculous that's adequate to demonstrate the truth of Christian theism.
That's wonderful. Thank you. What is the best place people can go to find out about more of your work, and where do you want to send our listener to?
Yeah, the simplest place to go to our website. The organization that I serve is called Stand to Reason. The acronym is STR. So there's your website, str.org. And it's a great website. I can't claim credit for it because I have an amazing team. I've provided a lot of intellectual property there, but so a lot of team members. We get so much articles, videos, training tools, all kinds of stuff. So I just invite people to go there and explore around and take a look and see what's there, and then make this maybe a daily watering hole, because we have blogs, we have video blogs, my own podcast broadcasts. We actually do we do 4 things a week. 2 separate hours of 1 hour call-in radio style, and then 2 30-minute segments where Amy Hall and I work together answering questions that people send in. That's called STR Ask, hashtag STR Ask. So those are, I think, great resources, and they're not burdensome. Like I said, the STR Ask is like 30 minutes less, and then the other shows are 1 hour each. So I used to do 3 hours all at once, and that's like 1 LA commute. So depending on where you live. But that's what I would suggest, str.org. And if people like the kind of things that we talked about together, then you'll probably like the podcast.
Wonderful. Well, Greg Koukl, thank you so much for joining me. We went a little bit over on time, so I appreciate you.
Well, it's my pleasure. You did a great job, and I love chatting with you.
Now, if you want to learn more about how to answer your friends' questions and how to engage in apologetics or the defense of the faith, check out thethink.institute. And you need to know about our new apologetics course. It's for Christian men, and it's aimed at helping Christian men to articulate and defend the truth of the Christian message. We're going to be breaking down a 3-step approach that is thoroughly biblical and is presuppositional. We don't dumb anything down. We don't water anything down, but we do break it down, make it very accessible. You will understand it, and then you'll be able to teach those answers to others. So you can learn more about that on our website, thethink.institute/apologetics foundations. You can get all the information on that course. All right. Well, thank you for listening to this episode of the Worldview Legacy podcast. Share this with a friend who you think would benefit, and we appreciate that. This episode has been a production of the Think Institute. We are a nonprofit organization, and you can donate tax-free by going to thethink.institute/partner is the website. Thethink.institute/partner. Thanks for listening, and until next time, I hope it made you think.